All right, guys, and thank you for tuning in to another Dead Hedgehogs podcast. Tonight, we're doing a special Agony Uncles where we have an addiction counsellor, Damien Daly from Leitrim, Donegal area.
Yep.
And he's going to be discussing some of the issues and problems surrounding addiction in Ireland.
Yeah, look, big thanks to everyone that has got in contact with the pages and sent in your issues, and feel free to if anyone is in needs a little bit of help or is in dire straits.
Never be afraid to contact us in any way, even if we're not doing an Agony Uncles podcast. We will love to get back to you and help you out in any problems that you have.
Yeah, and look, guys, thank you so much for supporting us. If you would like to become a patron, there'll be a link in below. If you do enjoy the podcast, please hit the like button, share it, or if there's anything that we raise that might be of interest to someone that you know, feel free to share it with them too, okay?
Yeah. Cheers, guys, and hope you enjoyed the podcast.
All right, guys. So Damien, thanks for coming on. Well, I suppose we'll start off with a couple of the questions that some of the guys have said.
Sure, we can do. Of course, we can.
Damien, just before we go to the questions, do you want to just give a little bit of an introduction of yourself, and your profession, and basically what you specialize in?
Yeah, sure, guys. First of all, thanks for having us on. My name is Damian Daly, and I'm a substance misuse outreach worker up here in the Northwest. So I work for a small community organisation, Ross Inver Youth Community Project, and we're funded by the Northwest Regional Drug and Alcohol Task Force to provide addiction services in Leitrim and Donegal. So that gives you a bit of an insight.
Cool. How have you seen, obviously, since we'll kind of just generalize this from the lockdown has started. How have you seen the need for your services over the course of the last year and a half?
Yeah, for me, it's been much the same. Hasn't been one way or the other. Well, when the first lockdown came in, kind of everybody kind of thought it was just going to be a couple of weeks, and people said, I'll chat to you in a couple of weeks, I'll be grand, kind of thing, But talking to colleagues around the country, a lot of people have seen a big upswing in demand for services. They're sort of seeing, I suppose, people that kind of lower level mental health stuff around social anxieties and stuff like that is then translating into substance misuse, and then people are getting in touch with services, seeking out the support, trying to get on top of maybe a bit of a hole they found themselves in.
I'm sure. First of all, Damien, thanks for joining us tonight. I'm sure that the lockdown with misuse, or we've had a few questions from people that had beaten addiction, and they're just lockdown has brought it back to them more so. Like just for example, this lady, she has beaten addiction. She'd beaten it, or thought she'd beaten it many times. She actually ended up in prison, and she got out about 7 years ago, ended up having a child, and then she completely bet addiction for the last 7 years. The child seems to have put her straight or give her something to live for. But she actually says during lockdown, the longer lockdown went on, she found the urge to get back into the old habits, creeping back in again. Now she hasn't fallen for them, but she just wants some advice to keep her on the straight and narrow.
Yeah, I suppose the first thing there is, rightly or wrongly, just the way it is, addiction has a greater burden on mothers and women in general than it does on men. That woman talks about having a daughter. The consequences of her relapsing are pretty large. You know what I mean? Like,
Of course.
Yeah, she relapses and that gets out, or she's, let's say for argument's sake, her child is 7. A child is in school or will be in school in September. If there's a social work referral there, she's going to have 2 slain on top of her pretty quick. they're obviously there to make sure the child isn't in any danger. And that's a big issue, for people. And then, a lot of treatment services in Ireland are geared towards men. You know what I mean? It's only very recently there is one treatment centre in the country that a woman can attend with her child. You know what I mean? Most treatment
Well,
Really, there's only one.
I never actually realized that. When you think about it, when people say addiction, you're probably right. And the funny thing is, we had a load of questions came in, and we won't even be able to get through all of them. But I'd say 80% of them were from actual women.
Yeah, because they're either they're vicious themselves or they're living with it, But you think of treatment centres that you may have known of, or even treatment centres you've seen in the media. You know what I mean? They're based upon people leaving their lives and going into a treatment centre, say, if it's a 28-day program or 6-week program or 3-month program, depending on what it is. You know what I mean? That's all fine and dandy if you're free and single or there's somebody to mind the kids. But if you've kids and there's nobody to mind the kids, that's a serious barrier to you attending,
Yeah.
So the consequences for this woman are, potentially quite big. So I suppose what I'd say to her is get in touch with services now before it's an issue. Get support now and get on top of these urges, these cravings, before they translate and turn into her actually using, So whether that be depending on what part of the country she's living in, there'll be local community organisations that she can get in touch with that specialise in addiction, or there's an organisation I'll probably mention a few times this evening called Smart Recovery, and they have online-based recovery meetings in the evenings, which really, again, suit a lot of women because they can put kids to bed or whatever, or if need be, put them in front of a tablet and or a TV, and they can log online and do a recovery meeting. And it means, they're not gone out half the night, by the time they travel to a meeting, do a meeting, travel home, that's, again, it's another barrier. So, get in touch with local services, or get into a recovery meeting. You know what I mean? She got on top of this issue 7 years ago. She knows the answers to what she needs to do to beat recovery. So go back to what worked and get in there early before it becomes a bigger issue.
Is there ever beating an addiction, or is it like this long-term management of a compulsion, or how would you are we because again that might be the way she describes it, and beating addiction might be the right way to describe it, but there's something about that. Is an addict going to have that compulsion no matter what, and it's about managing that compulsion? Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, no, I get where you're coming from, and I suppose you kind of get very theoretical kind of conversations, because in addiction there's a whole bunch of theories. You know what I mean? There's very few facts that you can say, right, that'll fit all people that are in that scenario. So you know what I mean? Like, you turn up to an AA meeting, you'll have some guy there who hasn't touched a drop of drink in 20 years, and he'll be telling them story, and he'll be describing himself as an alcoholic. You know what I mean? But he hasn't touched a drop of alcohol in 20 years. For some people it can be a lifelong battle. For some people it's just a phase that they went into, and a phase that they can move out of relatively quickly. In my experience, there does seem to be a bit of a matchup between, younger people who get in touch with services, say in their 20s, even their early 20s, and they don't have that much of what I'd call a drug taking career behind them. They tend to bounce quicker. I remember a colleague of mine used to say they're made of rubber. You know what I mean? Kind of 12, 18 months of kind of working on themselves, and boom, they're back into getting their life back on track, whatever it is they're aiming for. Whereas you've got somebody who's maybe coming to services in their 40s or 50s, and maybe they would have started in their early teens. You know what I mean? Like, that's a longer road for people to travel.
Is it possible, Damien, to be, we'll say, an alcoholic or a drug user or we won't actually, not drugs, but an alcoholic for 2 or 3 years, go off it, and then 10 years down the line, suddenly you're able to have a glass of wine without, falling into addiction, or, at the weekend, have a glass of wine with dinner and everything is okay. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, it's a nice grey answer, I suppose. Depends on what you term by an alcoholic. I suppose one thing that I was thinking about coming on here this evening, I was thinking, like, what's one of the things I want to get across? And one of the things I was thinking that I want to get across is, when people are asking themselves, do they have a problem with a substance? Forget this idea of, well, they consume this amount so often.
Yeah.
Go, right, well, sure, how could I have a problem with the drink? Sure, I only drink 4 nights a week, but your man down the road there is drinking fucking 7 nights a week and scoring points. You know what I mean? Sure, he's got a huge problem.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lady that a woman that I've worked with, and she might have 2 bottles of wine a year, maybe 1, maybe 2, and it's utter chaos.
Okay. Yeah.
That the impact of those, that drinking could last her 6 months to get back to where she was.
Crazy.
The circumstances. So, if people are asking themselves, do they have an issue with substance? Ask about, it's not what substance you're using, it's not how much you're using of it, it's not how often you use it, it's what's the impact on your life. Is it screwing up your relationships with people in your life? Is it affecting your work or your education or whatever you're into? Is it impacting your health? Is it financially putting you under pressure? Do you have dealers hounding you for money? It's those kind of questions, rather than, well, I only use once every 6 months. Yeah, but you're going a massive bender, and
Yeah.
it costs a couple
You
of
see,
grand.
the traditional way of looking at, we'll just say, alcoholism or drug use is, or even a new one would be gambling, I suppose, would be, can you go a week without drinking, or can you go a length of time without drinking? That's the traditional thinking behind alcoholism or whatever. Or could I go into a bookie shop and not have a bet? Do you know what I'm saying? Or the next time I go into the bookie shop and I have a bet, am I going to stay there all day until everything I have is lost, or I've technically won everything that I could possibly win, which very rarely happens or never happens. What's the definition? That's what I'm saying.
I suppose, yeah. Again, the definition is about sitting down and having a conversation. Like, if somebody comes to me, it's not me telling them. You know what I mean? If somebody comes to me, it's about me sitting down with them and going, okay, tell me about what's going on for you, and how does that play out in your life? And then if they're telling me it's causing chaos left, right, and center, you know what I mean? And you go, yeah, you've got an issue you need to get on top of. But sure, they already knew that. That's what they came to me in the first place.
Of course.
You know what I mean? But they mightn't have the full realization of it. But the kind of thinking that you're describing there, what's the purpose and function of that thinking? Purpose and function of that thinking is returning to using. Like, if you have a person, right, who they, they are coming to the realization they have a problem with a substance, right? And then they're going, oh, well, I'll go off it for a month.
It'll be good. It'll be good for a month, so I can save up my points to drink or use.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
the
we
of that kind of thinking is to keep using.
We've talked about this, me and Pete, about in the past, about drinking, about staying off it for so long, so that you're able to go on.
You're dedicated to the drinking.
Well, the thing is, I use it as a comical thing. But I enjoy my pints. But if you said, look, you can't drink for the next 2 months, I'd say no problem at all. That'd be my thinking. I know I could do it. I don't need it. I use it socially, and
like the majority
of people. Yeah,
What I think what you were saying there about the chaos that ensues, and that's where you can judge whether you have a problem or not. Obviously I'm sure that, as you said, there's many schools of thought on that. Is it the chaos that's following you around? Is that the problem? Is that a problem with the drink, or are you just a bit of an asshole? is it there's a multi-layered effect. And I suppose the one thing, even from the messages we've got in through the page, there's multiple different layers there as well, because as we were talking just before we started, a lot of it is because family are concerned
Yeah.
with certain the way their loved ones are actually using or abusing some of the substances.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I was talking to a lady the other day. She was telling me about her her nephew was addicted to drugs, and she brought him to some meeting or some expert, and he was sitting there, and people, it must have been some sort of AA thing, and she was sitting there, and he just couldn't sit. He couldn't sit. He had to leave, and she wanted to go to it for her to get counselling as well for what she was doing to him. You know what I mean? She was living with him at the time. And she said there was a lot of people come to the door. It was like love hate, and that's how she described it. But she said he made a great recovery then, but she said he wasn't ready at that time. You know what I mean? So you can't really force. You can't bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, for want of a better term. You know what I mean? What do you do in that situation then? If somebody you love is in a dire strait, what do you do then? You just have to. How do you?
I
Is there
suppose,
an
yeah. Do
intervention?
you have to wait, or like is that intervention always going to be slow to come? Is it?
Yeah, well, I suppose, look, you got a lot of stuff going on there. You've got this family member who in this case, your case, Peter, the aunt, you know, she's under massive pressure. You know what I mean? And all of her focus is on the nephew. If the nephew sorts himself out, that'll make all of her problems go away, which is fairly logical from her point of view. The only flaw with it is the nephew's having a great time getting off his head. There's no intention of stopping, because for him the consequences haven't got high enough yet, you know. So then what does a family member do? They want this person to stop, they won't stop, and there's all this stuff going on. They're having to live with them, the worry every time they go out the door. They're walking around on eggshells in the house, because every time your man, the nephew, say for argument's sake, is coming down off stuff, he's like a bloody bear and is liable to kick off and smash stuff or smash the place up or whatever, you know. Or there's dealers coming to the house. Imagine, like, you know, your own home and somebody's coming to the door and going, you don't give me 10 grand, I'm gonna burn the place down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, like, there isn't a credit union in the country that doesn't have drug debts on its books.
That's
Wow.
mental.
Yeah.
Wow. Crazy.
You know, years ago, you talk to, say, older people, older drug workers, you know what I mean? They talk about the 80s and 90s, you know what I mean? Somebody would run up a debt, and the dealers would come looking for the money, and say the person who owed the money disappeared or whatever. That was it. The debt was just effectively written off. But that doesn't happen anymore. You know what I mean? The dealers are saying, are transferring the debt to the family.
Wow.
You know, and they're saying, your son or your daughter or your whatever has knocked up a huge amount of debt, and we want our money back. And you've got family members scrambling around to get money together, or running down the credit union to borrow money to pay off these dealers.
Wow.
That's mental. I suppose, do addicts realize? Do they have are they corpus mentis when it comes to that sort of thing, like that? If they fuck up, it also falls back on their families.
I think the one thing you got to realize, people who are in that kind of abusive relationship with substances, is the role of denial. You know, an addict has to engage, or, you know, a person who's using has to engage in serious denial in order to keep it going. By that I mean, right, so, you know, it's very difficult for a human being to turn around and go, I'm going to go out now and I'm going to buy stuff on tick. I'm going to keep doing that, knowing that my mother is going to be burned out of her house.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They have to sell themselves a story that, listen, it'll be grand, I'll pay it off, it's double week next week,
Yeah.
and I'll get on top of it then. Or, Do you know what I mean? They're in for a windfall of cash from a claim or whatever, you know what I mean? Or I'll get a job next week, it'll be fine. That job's coming through. Sure, Mick down the road home, he'll take me on. I'll get on top of it then, or this is my last time, or just having one last blowout. You know, they have to tell themselves this story to allow them to do that.
Yeah. It's like that eternal optimist as well. Like I know people that every time they do, it's a different example of it though. Every time they do the lotto, they're going to win it. I mean, they're going to win it. There's no doubt about it. Tomorrow, Saturday night, I'm going to win the lotto. It's a done deal, you know, in their heads. And then they're like shocked on Sunday when they haven't won. You know, and there's just that attitude that it'll all be all right eventually until it's not all right.
Yeah, until reality comes crashing down.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
You mentioned online meetings, and then there's the physical meetings where you're actually in a room with people. Is it much more beneficial to meet people in a room where everyone can see each other, you can read emotions, you can read faces better, or is the online catching up?
It's horses for courses, and this is one of the positive things that's come out of COVID. Before, drug and alcohol services in Ireland were very much geared towards in person. You just met people in person. That's the way it worked. You set an appointment, they came into you, or you went and met them, whatever way it worked. And then all of a sudden COVID hit, and we all went into a scramble like everybody else, and we're like, right, you know, how do we connect with people if we can't actually see them? And we started doing, you know, Zoom meetings or just over the phone, and then we started running meetings online, and, you know, group recovery meetings online and stuff like that. And there's really interesting stuff out of it. There's definitely a bunch of people it just does not work for. You know what I mean? They need the in-person stuff. They need, as you say, they need to read the emotions. They need that human connection. They need the chat at the cup of tea beforehand. They need the bit of crack afterwards or whatever, you know. But then there's this big bunch of people that it really, really works for. And then there's another bunch of people that it actually works better for.
Okay.
Because it has way less impact on their life. You know, like you can get, you know, if you talk to people that go to AA, and like some people that go, you know, AA have a thing where it's 90 meetings in 90 days, you know, and they're talking about in-person meetings, you know. So like say you have a lad there in I don't know, Swinford, you know what I mean? And oh, grand, right, there's a meeting in Swinford on Friday night. But on Saturday night, he has to go to Westport, and on Sunday night, he has to go to Belmullah, and on Monday night, he has to go to Ballinasloe.
That's a major commitment for anyone.
It's a lot of driving as well,
Huge amount of driving. Now, there's the benefits, I suppose, in your early days. It takes up your whole evening. It's distraction. You know what I mean?
Yes, of course, yeah.
But again, you know what I mean? If you don't have all evening, if you have kids, that's just not viable. So having
or if you don't have the money.
You don't have the money, you don't have access to transport, you lost the bloody license. That's the reason why you're going to AA. That was your moment where you went, oh, Jesus.
Yeah. And I suppose you did say earlier on that we forget about addicts. We'll say that mothers, that they have a duty for their kids as well, that like 99.9% of mothers, no matter if they're, you know, addicts or not, try their level best. Irish mothers are just incredible. They have that duty as well, on top of what's going on for addicts.
But that's it, you know what I mean? Like you know, yes, of course there are men out there who are facing addiction issues, and the primary caregivers out there.
Yeah, that's true too.
You know what I mean? There are that, but the majority tend to be females. You know, and this online stuff has been great for them. And, you know, and over the phone service has been absolutely fantastic for them, because they can get a meeting in the middle of the day when the kids are in play school or in school or whatever, you know. You know, or fellas that are still working, maybe, you know what I mean, the substance has been an issue for them, but they haven't lost the job. You know what I mean? And
high functioning alcoholic, that would have been used to be classed as that high functioning alcoholic or drug taker that would still go into work every day and maybe in a very good, well-paying job as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what I mean? And again, online meetings work great for them. The other thing is, what online meetings can be beneficial for as well. Some people would be in jobs where they'd be seriously concerned about meeting people from their own local area. So, you go to
Okay,
your own
yeah.
of
local
course.
Yeah, of
meeting, and they
course.
go, they would have a sense of shame around it, or they'd fear that people would know, whereas they can go and log on to a meeting,
That's true.
and that could be a meeting in America. They could be doing a meeting
Yes.
out of California at 7 a.m. before work or whatever. You know what I mean?
That's brilliant.
On the flip, on the flip side of that small town attitude towards having a problem, then have we normalized addiction in this country a little bit, like especially with alcohol, and maybe even now I've noticed maybe even with cocaine use, it just seems to be so prevalent, and no one seems to bat an eyelid anymore.
Yeah, in one sense, yes, as in use is of, especially of cocaine, is quite high. But in the other sense, no, because especially with alcohol, because society still has this attitude where we look down on people that use drugs, but statistics don't lie. For every one person in this country that we have that dies of a drug related death, we've two that die of alcohol related deaths.
Mm-hmm.
And think of all the resources as a society we spend on trying to control drug use, compared to the resources we're spending trying to control alcohol use.
When it comes to legislation and how we legislate against people taking drugs, or what people do when they're drunk, do you think that the legislation in Ireland is relevant enough and works within the society? Because it obviously, as you said, it stigmatizes certain ways of doing stuff. Maybe heavy drug use in certain sections of society, we're talking about working class parts of the society, where very heavy drug use on a daily basis might be very high. And are they getting enough of the services handed to them, or is the court system up to date in how to deal with drug addiction? Or like, is there systems like they have in Portugal where they've decriminalized drug use, and they take it out of the penal system and try and give them adequate healthcare solutions instead of putting them in prison or whatever?
Jesus, nice, handy, small question.
Yeah. I was waiting around for that to go down.
Simple questions. That's it.
Look, I think we all know, and there's plenty of media stuff out there on, by any metric, the war on drugs, its outcomes have been pretty poor. I think anybody will accept that. You know what I mean? You look at the availability of drugs, you look at the price of drugs. You know what I mean? Most of the metrics have gone in the wrong direction for what they would want. But I think the interesting thing is everybody's talking about this Portuguese model as the way forward, and it's an interesting model. But for me, there's a more interesting model that nobody's talking about, and that's a model that they had in Iceland. And for me, that's the really interesting one, because there's different models out there that different countries have applied, and the outcomes, are, say, marginally better than the criminalization, war on drugs approach. But they're not spectacularly better results. You know what I mean? Like they you don't come going, wow, that's outstanding. You know what I mean? They do deliver benefits. There's no doubt they have proven different benefits. But the Iceland approach is really interesting.
What is the Iceland approach compared to here? What do they do differently?
It's real community driven. They back in seemingly the 90s, they had the highest level of alcohol use in 15-year-olds of any country in Europe. And then smoking likewise, and weed use or hash use, what it would have been back then, was pretty high too. And really interestingly, what they done was, rather than concentrating the kids that were using or that were getting drunk or smoking or using drugs, they went to all the kids that weren't, and they said, right, well, what's going on with these kids? Why are they not getting smashed on a Friday night? And they found out that they were engaged in organized supervised activity minimum 3 times a week. And so what they then done was they turned around and pumped money into every club and society in the country and went to every kid one by one. What do you do? What are you into? You know what I mean? Are you into boxing? Are you into football? Are you into drama? Are you into gymnastics? Are you into bloody tiddlywinks? It doesn't matter. Get them in. And then they done a bunch of other stuff as well. It wasn't just as simple as that. Like they went to low income families and they gave them a credit card that I think it's, if I remember right, it's something like £250 of credit on it that a family could go use for recreational activities. So if you wanted to bring your kids bowling, if you wanted to bring your kids cinema or swimming or whatever, you could get into leisure centers, all these kind of places with this card.
Fantastic idea.
Yeah, and so they challenged this parenting idea of quality time, and they said that's utter nonsense. They said it's quantity of time, being with your kids.
Yeah.
And then they also looked at kids being out at night, and they came up with a thing, effectively a curfew for kids, was it under 16 or under 18, and basically said they no business being out past 12 o'clock at night in the summer, unaccompanied by an adult, and no business being out, I think it was past 10 o'clock at night in the winter.
Wow.
And they I think they halved their numbers of kids that were basically abusing alcohol, drugs, and cigarettes.
You see,
it feels like a little bit of common sense, doesn't it?
Keep it rocket busy. Science, is it?
No, get the kids busy.
It's like because you're fighting against a losing battle when you're taking fun away from someone. It's like giving a 5 or 6 year old sweets. You're taking them sweets away for their own good, but they don't understand that. That's what they crave at that particular time, and you're trying to do them a favor. So you're fighting a losing battle. So, but if you replace that with something like that, recreation, and give them another option, that just makes sense.
Yeah, supposedly this generation of I'm not into soccer, but supposedly a generation of Icelandic soccer players that are coming through and that beat England in what was it, the Euros?
2016.
I think I remember.
Yes, seemingly that's off the back of partially off the back of that huge trust of investment into facilities that was driven partly by that policy, and not totally, you know what I mean, but it influenced policy, and there was money there for those clubs to draw down,
I suppose in a way it's a perfect, like a country like Iceland with a small population of 300,000 people is a perfect microcosm almost to trial something like that as well.
Did you eat a dictionary before?
Hey man, I'm talking to someone intelligent for a change.
Before you came up with big fancy words.
Well, can we go back to the decriminalization? So I have a basic understanding of this is you're criminalized now in Ireland if you get caught with drugs. Eventually, if you get caught with drugs, and say a young fella, he might go to prison, and then he might get into more trouble in prison, and then he comes out and he's learned he's got into them habits, bad habits in prison. So the Portuguese model is what exactly? They don't criminalize it if you get caught with drugs. There's a free ban on it, or free amnesty, or is it?
No, it's a little bit more. Well, my understanding of it's a little bit more complicated than that. And first of all, I suppose the first thing is decriminalization is not legalization. They're two totally different things, and people often throw them in together and as if they're the same thing, and they're not. Like decriminalization is you're caught with something, we're going to take it off you, and in the Portuguese model there still are some consequences, just not a criminal record. That doesn't mean you can walk into a shop and buy weed like you can in Amsterdam or Colorado or wherever. Legalization is you can go and purchase it from a government approved place. So
Yeah.
two totally different things. My understanding of the Portuguese model is you're caught with stuff, you basically get referred to services, and you get basically they look at you from a health point of view and go, okay, do you've got educational problems, do you have housing problems, do you have mental health problems, and they seek to offer you support in those areas. That's my understanding of the Portuguese model, and they've done it for all drugs as far as I understand. So
And
it's not just weed or whatever, or
do you think that could come into Ireland and be successful, or would we go more along the lines of the Iceland model?
Nobody seems to be talking about the Iceland model. I think the Western Regional Drug Task Force are doing a pilot of it, but that's about as much as I know or heard of in Ireland. There was talk that we were decriminalizing possession of weed, but it's not been enacted as far as I'm aware, and that people caught with weed were going to get referred to addiction services. But I've heard nothing from like high level government down that this has actually been implemented yet. But the problem with our current model is it's been implemented very, you could argue, unfairly. Like if you look at the Garda statistics for possession charges, they're wildly different from Garda division to division. Like if you're a young fella in Dublin 1, in that Garda division, like they have huge numbers of personal possession charges, whereas you could be in another area of Dublin and they've the same population, same number of guards, and they've got way less numbers of personal possession charges being put towards the courts. So it's been implemented very unevenly across the country, and there's probably an inherent unfairness in that,
And why do you think that is?
It's probably different Garda managers, pushing different priorities. I would imagine.
Well, the other side of it is that Dublin 1 in particular is some of the rougher, lower demographics in Dublin anyway. Like you're very working class socially.
It's the Belmullet of Dublin.
Hey, that's harsh, man. That's harsh.
I'm joking.
No, but it's like if you're comparing Sheriff Street to Blackrock, you're going to see a very big difference in the way they might be policed.
Yeah, true, but there's not a huge difference between Sheriff Street and Jobstown.
Of course not. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So yeah, no, I take your point that there is different approaches taken to different areas, but there does seem to be some standout contrasts in those figures.
Okay.
And the impact it does have on young people, like, the criminal record is still a big barrier for people. You know what I mean? And also, I wonder the value. I remember working with a young fella when I worked in Dublin one time, and I don't know how many times he'd been caught with weed. I could have been caught 10 or 12 times or something. And he was up in front of a judge the 10 or 12th time, and every time the judge goes, right, donation to the poor box kind of thing, he was giving them a couple of £100 at a time, you man had to throw in. But eventually the judge says, look, this is your, 10th or 12th time up. He says, if you're up in front of me again, I'm going to jail you. Wow. And he says, but, what's the value of that? The guy's got an issue, clearly addicted to weed. Yeah. And, well, he was coming into us to try to address that, he was working, he was employed, just every time that his local guards saw him, they stopped him, they searched him, found him with a relatively small amount of weed, sometimes as little as a joint, and then they're putting him through as a charge.
Yeah, it's a sort of waste of your own time there.
And is there some sort of like, I'm not dismissing guards now, guards have a tough job and everything, but is there a scoreboard, like, we've caught so many lads today, like, and Johnny the guard is trying to get better than the other, and it's like, oh well, there's Steve, he always has weed, and I'm going to catch him.
But there's definitely an arrest rate. They have a certain arrest rate that they're supposed to.
That's what I'm wondering. Yeah, do they have an arrest rate?
Is it different in rural areas? Sorry, we're bombarding you with questions now.
Yeah, I have no idea, but like I think it depends on the guard. You know what I mean? They're probably motivated. Maybe the guard are great motivation, thinking eventually this fella will get the bloody idea and get on top of it. But at the same time, I've had other guards ring me and go, "Listen, there's this fella. You know, he's got a huge problem. He's and he's going to die if he doesn't get help. Will you get in touch with him and you work with him?" Do you know what I mean? So, you know, I'm certainly not slating guards by no
Oh,
means.
Christ, no.
Oh,
You know, no, you do get people guards who ring me up, and you know, they know themselves that the criminal justice approach has its limitations. You know what I mean? And they want to see people get sorted. You know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
I think just one thing that was when we're talking about legislation and trying to give people dignity within the legislation, I think that's almost lacking in our current legislation. That you're almost if you're kind of labeled, and if you do get a criminal record, they'll follow you around, like, you know. So it's like, I think as you said at the start, there has to be a change somewhere. But I used to live with this guy who was a major part. He was an assistant to one of the ministers, and he was massively against even the Portuguese model, never mind the Icelandic model, or say legalizing weed like Colorado or Amsterdam, because he was part of Fine Gael, and he just thought that most people of their voting bloc will never get on board with that. Do you think that there'll have to be almost a societal change, and like our generation gets a little bit older and gets on board with this before we see any changes at all? Like,
Yeah, well, look, any change is in the law is going to be ultimately driven by politicians. That's how the system works. So, you know, until you get a politician who I suppose it's their main issue that they want to drive change on. Yeah, and the system's gonna operate that. Like, you know, we've seen minority parties get what they want because they were the power brokers. So maybe it'll happen something like that sometime, or it could well be driven within one. Change could come from within one of the major parties. It's not impossible either, you know.
Yeah.
But it's
We get back to one of the questions here as well. There's a lad contacted us, a lad this time, and he's watching his mother for the last 2 years fall into alcoholism. What happened was she retired a couple of years ago, and suddenly she's found herself relying more and more on alcohol, and she wasn't a drinker. The thing is, she wasn't a drinker beforehand. And is there any advice you can give him how to help her?
Yeah, well, I suppose that's his goal, isn't it?
Yeah.
His goal is he wants her to get herself sorted.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I suppose the difficulty is that may not be her goal, that may not be her plan. And, you know, kind of say to people in who I'm working with, you know what I mean? If this ain't your plan, it ain't worth it down. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because if they're not buying into the plan, you know what I mean? Like, you know, we can sit here around here and chat about it, and we could have this guy come on and chat about it, and we're all chatting about this woman's problems, but she's not in the conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Talking about it. You know what I mean? So I suppose what's the goal? His goal is her to stop, but the process to do that is probably to get some kind of help. But I suppose to step back from that and look at, well, what's the impact happening on this guy? You know, is he living with his mother? You know, is every time he goes out to work, say for argument's sake, and she's drinking herself there, is he wondering, is she going to come home and, you know, her passed out or injured?
Yeah, I get the impression that this lad is living with the mother. So
he is.
Yeah.
You know, and also imagine the impact of that. Imagine you being, you know, in this guy's shoes, and you thinking, I can never have one of my mates around the house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want them seeing me mother in that state.
Yeah,
I mean, you think of how isolating that becomes, you know, or everybody in the town or village knows she has a problem. The secret's out, and for him, he just doesn't want people asking how she is, and then to stop people asking, he stops going out.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where the kind of real impact on families, they become really isolated, you know. And what I'd say to him is to reach out to services for him and how he can manage,
Okay.
because he's got to manage the impact on his life. And then when she's ready, he can, you know, go, well, this is the number of a person, or this is a meeting, or this is a service you can contact, or whatever. But at the moment, the only person who wants to change is him.
Yeah. So he needs to strengthen his own mindset up.
Yeah, and there is an organization called Smart Recovery, and they do online meetings for family and friends of people that have stuff, and that's usually a good place. So maybe you can send that link on to you guys. And you can
That'd be brilliant.
Yeah, we'll share that link with this podcast. So
it'll be in the description.
100%. Tell us about the process of actually counselling. Sorry, now we're bombarding you with questions, but we're keeping it nice and flowy as well, you know. But tell us the actual process of actually counselling somebody. How, like, I know individual basis probably take longer, but is it the cognitive behavioral therapy? Do you use that, or is there different approaches? Or
yeah, there's different approaches, I probably suppose, brought by different organizations, you know what I mean? So a lot of the treatment centers will be 12-step, which would be your AA based models, you know, whereas say a lot more of the day services or the HSE services will be based on cognitive behavioral therapy models. That'd be the model that I would work on, you know.
Okay. And I just have a layman's term on what actually cognitive behavioral therapy is. I was just proud of myself that I pronounced it right. Can you give us a breakdown of what it actually is if somebody's listening and they want to read up on it or something? How would you use that in a practical sense?
Okay, yeah. So look, I suppose to start off, cognitive behavioral therapy, it's been around for, I don't know, 40, 50 years at this stage. And it is the leading, what we call evidence-based therapy for a whole range of issues: depression, anxiety, through to addictions, and various mental health issues like bipolar and borderline personality disorder. And then there's branches of CBT as well. It gets a bit more complicated, but yeah, what I mean by evidence-based, you know what I mean? There's been big studies done on it, you know, huge numbers of participants going, does this stuff work? And the answer is, yeah, it does, you know. So what it is cognitive behavioral therapy really looks at, well, what are a person's behaviors? You know what I mean? See, somebody can be saying one thing and doing another. And usually what they're doing is a greater indication of where their head's at. Yeah, I'm this is my last point. Yeah.
Action.
Please. Yeah, action. So what's somebody's behaviors, right? That's a kind of an indication of where they're at. And also, you know, so behaviors are easier to measure. Somebody's either doing something or they're not. You know what I mean? Somebody's either you know, say if they have depression, they're either getting up out of bed and going to work or they're not. It's pretty easy to say, you know, did somebody do something or not? So it's measurable, you know what I mean? So a good CBT therapist will sit down with somebody and go, right, tell us about your life, tell us what the issues are, and okay, let's get a measurement of where you're at, which is usually a set of behaviors, and that's your baseline. Okay, so you've established where you're at, and then you sit down with the person and go, okay, where do we want to be? You know what I mean? So a couple of months down the line, you know, what are we going to improve on here? And then it's about coming up with the person, coming up with a bunch of strategies on how do you get from A to B.
Okay.
That makes
some of the thought on how people tackle addiction. Like if you had asked me how someone tackled drugs or drug addiction when I was 15, I would have said like train spotting when Renton was falling through the bed.
Yes,
you know?
yes.
that would have been the go-to.
there was this thing of like drying out. Like years ago, they go, "Oh, he's gone in, he's drying out." And I was
He's
like, when
drying
I was
out for a
kid,
week.
I was
Yeah, yeah.
like,
Yeah,
I was like,
I never watched.
what
Train
is
Spotting
it? Is
Two.
it an orange or something, or is it fruit? Or I couldn't understand it as a kid. Or they had all these euphemisms for like he's fond of the drink, or like she's bad with the nerves. Do you know what I mean? Irish people have a great way of saying stuff without saying stuff. Do you know what I mean? But like, do people still do interventions, or is that just in the movies?
Still do interventions. I suppose families do. You know, that whole American program of they create this
The
false
greatest
family,
cry
this
ever.
big this big confrontation, and they say what you want to say, and then the person ends up storming out and all that kind of stuff. So I suppose people are influenced by media and think that's the approach they should take, and I'm sure it worked for somebody somewhere at some time. But
Yes.
I wouldn't be advocating to put it that way,
See, my
Okay, because it might antagonize the person. It might antagonize the person, and they might just never go for help then.
Or they might close off, just fuck it off.
See, my approach to fighting addiction is the old-fashioned way, cold turkey. Just like do it. That's. But I'm not. That is for me wishful thinking on behalf of other people that I might have known in my past or know now. My attitude is just do it. Just beat it.
But you're a
Simple as that.
professional, so it's okay,
But do you know what I mean? Like it's just get on with it, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Or go for a run.
I think we all know that life isn't as linear as that.
Yeah.
As right, just do it. Go for a run.
Yeah.
And we'll see you on the other side.
Stiff upper lip, kind of just get on with it. That doesn't, that's repressing whatever's going on, I think.
Yeah.
It can be, and so for some people it works.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Some people just bowling through it, but it depends on what you're made of and what brought you to that point. And some people enjoy hardship. You know what I mean? Some people love a bit of, that pain you get from training. Like some lads go on a mad bend or a coke, and they know they're in the depths, and they know the only way they're getting through it is to get their endorphins going, and they do a mad amount of training, and they just, they can put up with the pain. They can, lads will be training in their early 20s, and they go, yeah, sure, went for a load of pints the night before, and they'll do half a lap of a field and puke up, and then you just keep going by grand. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Horses for courses, but
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Stephen. So
generally, I suppose you've got two approaches. You've got is somebody aiming for abstinence, or is somebody aiming for harm reduction? And abstinence is black and white. They're either using or they're not. Harm reduction is a little bit kind of grayer, and but it can be just as useful, because for some people, abstinence for where they're at is just not realistic. Them just stopping, it's just not going to happen. So how do you help them pull it back a bit? How do you help them take away some of those really negative impacts, try to get a bit of a grip in it, and see how they go then,
Have you ever, can you tell the difference between someone that's using it? So have you ever dealt with people that are using the fact that they're addicts or addicted to something, or they're not really addicts, but they're just using it as an excuse
we were
in
talking
life?
about this earlier on,
Yeah,
right?
but like, or maybe just attention seeking.
Yeah, or they're just assholes and they're just using that as an excuse.
How do you mean? Give us a bit more there.
Well, like, I over my years, I've dealt with people that have used a problem that they've had, and it'd be more that they just didn't want to work. That's or it was an excuse not to get their lives together, even though they were well capable of doing it, and in my opinion, weren't really alcoholics. Or
I know a fella that said he was an alcoholic for years because someone else in his circle was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, sure, he's one of these. He's one-upmanship is top
Yeah.
level.
Well, I'm a better alcoholic. than
I'm
you.
a better, yeah, exactly. You know, like, and it was almost an excuse for him just to be an asshole to people, and they go, "Oh, sure, he's an alcoholic. It's grand."
Yeah, I suppose it depends on this idea of an alcoholic. You know what I mean? Calling somebody an alcoholic, or them calling themselves an alcoholic, you know, that's just one theory of addiction. There's an awful lot of evidence to support that theory, but also there's a load of evidence that means it's total bullshit.
Yeah.
You know, so
And that's not me, by the way, lightening, you know, the addiction. I'm just making an example of one or two examples that I know of. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Like you have the AA approach, right? And they will say, you know, you need to admit you're an alcoholic. That's fine. That's their approach. And, you know, God only knows how many million people have been through AA and it's worked for them. But at the same time, a cognitive behavioral therapy approach would say, you know, you are what you tell yourself you are. So if you keep saying to yourself every day, you know, I'm an alcoholic or I'm a drug user, well, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
yes.
You know, whereas, you know, so say somebody from would try to get people to describe their what we call a relationship with a substance. You know what I mean? Is that relationship, is it are they using it and you know, they're kind of getting away with it and it's grand? Are they abusing it, or are they dependent upon it? Where are they on that spectrum? You know, and really look at getting into the detail of how they use.
Okay, yeah, because there always seem to be like a religious component. I think I mentioned this before the last time I was talking to you. There seems to be this kind of religious component which the 12 steps. I don't fully understand it, so maybe I shouldn't be talking about it, but I'm just asking a question. It's kind of like you'd always have to accept stuff, and then there's a higher power. But what if somebody isn't religious? What if somebody is atheist and they don't have that belief? Can they still use 12 steps?
They can do, and people have. Yeah, there's no shortage of people who don't believe in God and have gone into, you know, a 12-step program and got something out of it. But there are alternatives there, you know. There are treatment centres that are not 12-step based, and as I say, most HSE services or HSE funded services are not 12-step based. You know what I mean? They'd be more cognitive behavioral therapy based, so you know, they wouldn't have that higher power or the opening prayer or that kind of stuff that AA would have. Again, look, you know, AA's worked for huge volume of people. You know, it's very much horses for courses, you know.
For yourself, do you think that there's been a societal change in the way people empathize with people with addiction issues, or do you think that we're still kind of divided on how people should be approached that way?
I suppose it kind of goes back to what you were earlier saying. If we had this societal great empathetic approach, we would have passed the decriminalization legislation by now. We'd have our supervised injection centres. We'd have services that have sufficient funding for the level of demand that's there. Not all of those boxes are ticked, I suppose. So I suppose there's no doubt we've come a long way, and we do have, you know, needle exchange services and that kind of stuff that you know, a lot of people fought for years to get them in, and they were fought tooth and nail on the other side, but they're there, you know. So, and there is funding there for services, and there is no doubt, you know. So
with the needle exchanges and the supervised injection centers and stuff, are they? I know there was there one based on Marlborough Street, or was that a methadone clinic? But I think there was a few that were dotted around Dublin, wasn't there?
there'll be a number of methadone clinics dotted around Dublin. We don't have a supervised injection centre yet in the country. You know, but I think that's the real thing about addiction, is that opioid users tend to get, or opioid services tend to generate a huge amount of controversy and news. But really, when it comes down to the number of people in the country that have addiction-related issues, opioid users are a tiny fraction of people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tiny fraction of users. Now, don't get me wrong, there's huge issues related to that. Do you know what I mean? But again, the number of opioid users in the country compared to the number of people that have an issue with alcohol, it's, I don't know what the ratio is, but
is there such thing as a hopeless case, like someone that doesn't want to be fixed?
I think you can't predict it. You know what I mean? I've had people come in and like that. I've done an assessment with them, and you kind of come out with the assessment, holy Jesus, that person has been dealt some hand since the day they arrived on this earth. You know what I mean? And you go, it'll take something else to come back from that. And they do. And likewise, you could do another assessment with another fella, and you're going, that's, you know what I mean? It has had a fairly all right background behind them, and not a huge long issue or whatever, and they just keep sinking into it.
Because the reason I asked that is when we said we were going to do this type of podcast, I was talking to a girl about it, and she maintained that there are actually some people that you cannot be fixed or don't want to be fixed.
Well, if they don't want to be, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If they don't want it. I was on the phone to a guy this week, and he was referred to me by a hospital, and he's sitting in a hospital up in Dublin, and he was like, no, I'm grand, I'm going to do this by myself.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay. Up until now, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, when are you getting home next week? He was right, sure. I might give you a ring next week and see how you're getting on. That was the best I could get out of him. They agreed to another phone call, but like,
can we do one more question? There's a few there, but we'll do one more. And this lady, it's something different, and that's why I want to do this one. We've addressed most the questions that we would have been sent in over the last hour. This lady's husband's brother committed suicide because of addiction, or through addiction, or he got depressed and eventually took his own life. But it's turned the husband into one of these nearly a recluse, that he doesn't go to any functions or any family events, or he won't put himself in, even though he had no problem at all with alcohol or anything like that. Suddenly what they had social life, now they've no social life, and because he's afraid that he'll fall into the same problems as his brother did, and it's starting to affect the marriage. Is there any advice you can give her for him, or
I'd wonder, it'd be interesting to talk to him, all right, and see what his thinking on around it is. Is it a bit more complicated than, he's destined, if he goes to somewhere that serves alcohol, it's just destiny that he's going to end up with a serious problem and committing suicide or whatever, When I hear that, I'm wondering about suicide, and I'm wondering about stigma and shame around that, and is this guy struggling? We still have the societal stigma and shame around self-harming and suicide, and I wonder, is he struggling with that as much as this idea that he's going to end up having this huge issue? Is he not going to these family events because he doesn't want somebody asking, oh geez, how are you getting on about your brother's death, and and how did he do it, and who found him, and all the ins and outs, and he's just going, I don't answer any of this stuff, it's too painful, too raw.
Anyone that asks that is asking too fucking much anyway.
Probably.
But it does happen.
It is, and people don't mean any harm by it. It's like the elephant in the room sometimes,
Yeah.
Well, see,
you're damned if you don't.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's this American researcher, Dr Berne Brown, and she has a couple of YouTube talks that are really good. She's researched shame, and she talks about shame in terms of what's the kind of factors that allow shame to grow and to foster, You know, it's kind of talks about it like a plant, like, you know, what does it need in order to grow? And she's saying like the key component of shame is secrecy.
Wow.
Wow.
So you think of anything in your life or what you know of that people would have shame about. Secrecy is a huge element of it. Tell nobody. You know, think of somebody who's been sexually abused. You don't want anybody knowing.
Yeah.
It's shame. You got to keep it a secret. Got to keep it locked down. Don't let anybody know. And consequently, she talks about the antidote to shame being human connection. So actually talking to somebody about it. So the very thing that you don't want to do is the thing you need to do in order to take some of it away.
Yeah.
So in terms of getting back to this woman and her partner or husband, you know, I'd be thinking PA the house offer counselling services for people that have suffered bereavement from suicide. The HSE has a bereavement counselling service that you can access through your GP. You know, so those will maybe be good starting places, you know, in terms of
which
providing a safe space for somebody to talk to start to take away some of those.
Which we'll try and add. We'll try and add them links.
Yeah,
we'll
all links. We'll put in a lot of links in the description.
Yeah.
So if anyone has a particular need for a service or knows someone,
Damien, I have a quick question for you, and we better let you go because it's getting late, and I'm sure you have other things to be doing. Talk to us three wankers. But how? Two questions. How did you get into it? And what inspired you to get into it? And how do you look after yourself when you're hearing about such tough, hard cases and about their life? How do you look after yourself? Does it take a toll? Does it take a toll on you?
It can do. When you're in any kind of caring profession, they talk about self-care. You know, I mean, basically a bunch of things that you need to do to keep yourself right. You know, keep your head right and prevent burnout, I suppose. You know, I would have what's called clinical supervision once a month. So once a month, I'd sit down with a counsellor myself, and if I'm struggling with a client or, you know, kind of struggling how to approach them or whatever, you have that support there, you know. But it's very much about just trying to keep your life in balance. You know, try not to do overtime too often, and make sure you get out for your exercise or whatever. You know, trying to keep work at work. Try not to let it filter into your life. A bit harder now than working from home during a pandemic. It used to be very good.
Of
You know
course.
what I mean? That separation of space. You know, the car journey home was great for switching your head off and working into your own life, you know what I mean? But don't have that anymore. So
you could listen to the Dead Hedgehogs podcast on the way as well, which is great.
Shameless plug.
Great way. Yeah.
Please like this. Please like this.
Actually, I used to find the car great as well.
Say again?
I used to find the car great, especially when I used to come down from Dublin. It was a complete switch off.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing else you can do bar actually be in your own thoughts or go for a run. Like that's my answer to everything.
He eventually got it in. He eventually
got it in. It's go-to advice. It's go-to advice.
Yeah. Whatever your form of exercise is, but for me, it's getting out on the mountain bike. You know, going down to Union Wood here in Sligo. You know, and getting
oh my God, I'm going there Saturday. I was there last week. What a beautiful spot.
That's cracking, isn't
it? Gorgeous.
Yeah.
Beautiful spot. Yeah.
It is. It's just about finding your thing, whether it's running, whether it's bringing the dog for a walk, whether it's going for a bike. But yeah, there's very few people felt worse after coming back from a bit of physical activity.
Yeah, brilliant. So my advice is sort of valid in some way.
Cure all for everything.
I have another question, Damien. A friend of ours, and he's on this podcast, is awful addicted to the phone. He's completely addicted to the phone. And we know who he is.
We won't give it away too much.
We won't give it away, but it's Cowboy. It's Cowboy to the left of me. He's to the left of me on the screen.
We wouldn't mind if it was porn or something like.
You were going to ask this question as well, Steve. You were.
I was. I was just like, I have an awful habit. It's like it's becoming an addiction at this stage. Even when I don't need the phone, or even there, I took the phone out, even though I had nothing to do. I could do nothing with it. I took it out and had a look at it. Do you know? It's nearly a habit at this stage. any advice how to break a habit? Not just
Well,
phone, but in my case, the phone, but things like that. Have you any like tips to break habits?
You said earlier on you were fond of the cold turkey, so just turn the fucking thing off.
No.
There you go.
I'm trying to. It doesn't last long.
Just
How long-
stop, Steve.
How
Just
long,
stop.
P? How long, P? Did I last? You timed me a few times, and the average was how long?
It was, and I have to state that he was driving at the time, and he
Yeah.
couldn't. It was, I think it was like 2 minutes.
No,
minutes.
it was not. It was 6 minutes.
It was in 6 minutes. Every 6 minutes, he had to go on the phone. I think it was.
Yeah,
Every
there was.
6
This
minutes.
was 6 minutes, and me trying
Yeah.
to stay off the phone, like consciously knowing that I was meant to be staying off the phone.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's not good.
No, it's not great.
No,
For sure,
not
look.
great. No,
And to be honest, it's just looking at your own likes.
you know,
Does that make it worse?
yeah, seeing
It
how
does.
the pages is going, and then I'll go to do something on the phone, and next thing is 3 hours later, and I'm watching, some lad boxing an emu out in New Zealand. It's crazy stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you couldn't miss that. Where would you like to be?
Yeah. I wouldn't blame him for that now either myself. So
Sounds good. Would you send it on to me, would you?
Well.
Damien, one more question, and we'll let you go.
Sure.
One more question. Have you any advice for us doing this podcast? We get a lot of people texting the page, and majority of the times, me and Steve say, just go for a run, do some exercise. That's our advice. If you any, and there was one case where we specifically had problems, and we sent out helplines and everything. Have you any other advice for us if we get somebody at a gig, or if we get somebody? Cowboy is on social media more so than me, and you get a lot of people talking to you about their
Yeah.
problems. Any
Yeah.
advice for how do we approach it?
Yeah, the first thing I'd say, like going for the run or going for the walk, it's not bad advice. You know what I mean? Like people, I remember doing a meeting one time. I was facilitating a recovery meeting, and one guy was going, "There, one more person telling me to go for a walk." He was going to lose his life. You know what I mean? But there's a reason why everybody keeps telling you, because
Yeah, that's
it
true.
really works. There's a lot of great resources out there at the moment. There's one app I came across there a while ago. It's really good. It's a CBT based app called What's Up. So you go into your Play Store or whatever, and you download it, and it's a really good practical tool for dealing with kind of lower level depression and anxiety. It's got good information on it, and then good strategies and tips that you can use for those kind of issues, and you apply it to loads of other stuff as well. So
Brilliant. So
yeah,
what's up?
Yeah, What's Up is a really good app, and there's loads of other ones out there, But I suppose the thing that I'd say to people is try to get a handle on what the problem actually is. You know what I mean? It sounds really obvious, but you had a bunch of people write in, and they were talking about their problem was their family member causing chaos.
Yeah.
But really, the problem is they're getting sucked into it all the time.
Yeah.
And they can't put distance between them, and they can't have their own life because this other person's causing all this chaos. Because you can't control other people, you can only control what you can do. So trying to define the problem.
Now that you've said that, I'd say 70%, 75% of the problems being texted in are actually people
Someone else
asking about someone else.
and that we've been talking about this as well. That you can, like what Pete said, you can bring a horse to water, you can make it drink. All of those things are true. You can do for someone else,
but I know that their best interests are at heart. Obviously,
it's just
Well, potentially, some of them could be talking about themselves as well. The whole story. I've got a friend that likes a girl.
Yeah. Likes what?
But it's really. I've got a friend that likes a girl. The barman is always like.
Right.
But it's actually him that likes the girl. Do you know what I mean?
Talk to us, P. Tell us about it.
You're in a safe space.
No, but I'm just saying some of them could be talking about them actually themselves, but they're saying it's somebody else.
Of course,
Potentially, yeah, of course. But I think the thing of it is with family members, they're talking about somebody that they have a very long, very deep connection with, having a problem. There's somebody they love. At the end of the day, if the family member had the power to make them stop, they would have done it a long time ago.
Yeah.
reality is they need to recognize that it's not in their control. They can't make them stop. So what can they do for themselves? And ourselves, we have a family support service, and again, I'll give you his contact details for that, and maybe you can put in the description. People can get in touch with us and
Absolutely.
start that.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Brilliant, Tim.
It's been brilliant chat to you, and you've highlighted a lot of things, especially about the women, that there's not many services for women, and hopefully that'll be rectified in the future. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it is getting there. It is getting there. It's a lot better than it was.
Great.
Absolutely. Look, Damien, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Brilliant
Damien.
chatting to you, Damien.
It's
Thank you.
enjoyable.
Brilliant.
Yeah, if it's going to be a help again, let us know.
All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed tonight's podcast with Damien. He was a brilliant guest to have on, and I hope it's addressed any issues that anyone is suffering from or going through at the minute in your lives or family members' lives. So we really hope that it helped.
Yeah, and you'd be really happy to know Stephen will never pick up the phone ever again.
Ever. There'll be no more videos.
He's fixed. He's fixed.
I'm a new
Take
man.
a while. So look, please like and share the video, guys. If you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. It makes a massive difference to us, and obviously hit that notification bell so you get more of this content.
Exactly. And also, if you'd like to keep the dream alive and keep us in motion, and if you'd like to become a patron member, please do. It's for $5 a month, and it keeps the ball rolling here. And remember, anyone that becomes a patron member will get into any 3 Bucks Left show that's going to be happening in the end of the year and into next year. So
yeah, if you become a Patreon member now, we're going to send Pete out to see you, have a cup of tea
every morning,
sleep in your bed, and enjoy yourself.
All right, guys, thanks for watching.